But in Ecclesiastes 7 and 8, we're in chapter 7 and verse 18 today. Starting there in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 18. It's interesting what he does here. It connects a lot with what we've just talked about last week. Last week he talked about, of course, how there are good and bad things that happen to both the righteous and the wicked. But one of the big things that it really connects with those from verse 16, which talks about not being overly righteous and not being overly wise. And so what do you read in verse 18 is this. It is good that thou shouldest take hold of this. Yea, also from this withdraw not thine hand. For he that feareth God shall come forth of them all. Some translations might even say he gets both. And the point of that is to say someone who fears God, he's going to have righteousness and wisdom. You see, whenever you read this in the book of, actually in the book of Psalms and Proverbs, it talks about how the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Go ahead, so someone read for us Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7. We see this repeated throughout the book of Proverbs and even in the Psalms.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Wisdom and instruction.
Someone also read for us Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 10.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight.
And so over and over again, it points out the fact that someone who fears God is going to have both knowledge and wisdom. And so here in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 18, again, coming forth with both. The one who fears God comes forth with both. He's going to have righteousness and wisdom is the point. He's going to have both of those. He's going to, again, if someone actually fears God, reveres, that's reverence there. If we have reverence for God, we are going to behave that way. We're going to have both righteousness and wisdom because we're going to know we need to be following the Lord, and we're going to do so. Continuing on from there, of course, verse 19 continues on and says, wisdom strengtheneth the wise man more than 10 mighty men which are in the city. Let's go ahead and read through the rest of this section here through verse 29. For there is not a just man upon earth that doeth good and sinneth not. Also take no heed unto all words that are spoken, lest thou hear thy servant curse thee. For oftentimes also thine own heart knoweth that thou thyself likewise hath cursed others. All this have I proved by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 24. That which is far off and exceeding deep, who can find it out? Verse 25, I applied mine heart to know and to search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things and to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. And I find more bitter than death the woman, whose heart it ensnares and nets, and her hands are as bands. Whoso pleaseth God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. Behold, this have I found, saith the preacher, counting one by one to find out the account, which yet my soul seeketh, but I find not. One man among 1,000 have I found, but a woman among all those have I not found. Lo, this only have I found, that God hath made man upright, but they have sought out many inventions. And so just a lot of things being addressed here, a lot of things in regards to wisdom and how people that fear God should behave in life. Just a lot of different things being talked about here when it comes to fearing God and wisdom. I know the point says what wisdom does wisdom. I don't know what happened with Grammarly at that point, but this is basically saying what wisdom does. That's what this section talks about, a lot about that. Again, we talked about the one who fears God will have righteousness and wisdom. That's, again, verse 18. Wisdom strengthens a man. That's verse 19 again. Wisdom strengtheneth the wise man more than 10 mighty men which are in the city. It's just pointing out how strong wisdom is for a person. You see, because they are going to be doing what's right in the sight of the Lord. If they fear God, they're going to have righteousness, wisdom, and it's going to help strengthen them to remain faithful to God. That's what it's talking about there. It just goes to show you, again, it's stronger than 10 mighty men. He's just pointing out how strong, how wisdom strengthens people. That's what he's talking about there. You can have 10 mighty men who will blow their top off, you see, but wisdom is stronger than that. Anyways, he continues on, of course, with verse 20. For there is not a just man upon earth that doeth good and sinneth not. That's interesting. He says it like that. Because if you read verse 19 and 20 together, wisdom strengtheneth the wise man more than 10 mighty men which are in the city. For therefore there is not a just man upon the earth that doeth good and sinneth not. It's almost like it's connecting the two when you read it like that. And I think really the point when we're looking at those two verses together is just to show, he's saying, look, wisdom is going to tell us that we will eventually sin. And we're going to understand that. You know, this kind of goes back to what it talks about in 1 John. We were in 1 John chapter 1 a couple months ago, and we talked about how it says in there in verse 8, if we say we have not sinned, what does it say? We deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. Verse 9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins. You see, foolish people are going to say, no, I haven't sinned. Foolish people may not even recognize they've sinned. A wise man is going to understand that even righteous struggle against sin. That's what it's talking about there. Any questions or comments on that? Even the righteous will struggle with sin. Even the righteous are guilty of sinning. Continuing on from there, again, wisdom helps a man understand these things. With verses 21 and 22, also, this is interesting here. Also, take no heed unto all words that are spoken, lest thou hear thy servant curse thee. For oftentimes also thine own heart knoweth that thou thyself likewise has cursed others. That's interesting verbiage right there that he uses there. It's like, well, wait a minute, you've cursed people. You see, what he's talking about here is kind of interesting. It's basically a wise man. If you look at letter D here on page 5, it says a wise man will understand that he shouldn't take to heart everything he hears. You know, there's people that talk bad about us behind our back, but you know what? Maybe they don't actually mean some of the things they're saying behind our back. You see, Ethan, he's just kind of sloppy in everything he does. Ethan never looks good in his shirts. I wish he had better shirts. I wish, people talk bad about you behind your back. Sometimes it just doesn't mean anything. They're just yapping their chops off and not even thinking. Some people talk like that. They just yap their chops off. They talk and talk and talk, and they don't really say anything. Kind of like politicians. But that's what this is talking about here. Sometimes people may talk bad about us, and they don't even mean what they're saying. So again, we've talked about this a little bit with nails in the fence. We've talked about that story, how the mother told her daughter every time she rebelled to say something, every time she not rebelled but said something mean to her mother, I hate you or something like that. It leaves holes in the fence. We talked about that last week. Well, here, of course, it's saying that, look, understand some of those words, yeah, they hurt and they leave a scar. Understand that they may not mean what they're saying. And of course, we may ourselves find that maybe at times we may have talked bad at one point about someone. You see, gossip is something that tends to be something that can happen to anyone, you see. And he's saying, look, you've talked bad and you didn't mean anything by it. You may have talked bad about a brother or sister in Christ and you didn't mean anything by it. I don't like his shirt. I don't like his glasses. I don't, and maybe something like that, or I wish something like this would happen. I wish that he would do it this way. I wish he would do it that way. And maybe you said it like that. If the person you're talking about heard that, well, maybe they'd feel hurt. But he's saying here, look, you may have talked that way about someone at some point. You see, you may have talked about someone behind their back. Of course, it's wrong to do that, but he said you may have very well done that. It's one of those sins that's very hard to overcome, gossip. Gossip is one of those. Any questions or comments on that? Yes.
I think his overall point he's trying to get at, it goes back to verse 16 too. Do not be overly righteous. Do not make yourself too wise. He says you will destroy yourself. He's getting the point here that, he says in verse 20, surely there is not a righteous man on earth who is good and never sins.
Mm-hmm.
He wants us to understand that we need to humble ourselves and understand that we're going to sin, as you said.
Yeah.
And that we also need to keep in mind that so is our neighbor.
Yeah.
So is the people that are around us. They're not perfect either.
Yeah.
And when we get to the point that we are holding ourselves up as overly righteous, we get what we have in the New Testament with Pharisees, Sadducees, and others. And even Paul says, take heed, lest you fall.
Yeah.
So, the Pharisees, what they do, thank God I'm not like this man, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were like that man.
Yeah.
There's no difference between the two. They're both sinners.
Yeah.
The only hope they have is in Christ.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that we don't begin to rely on ourselves, our own righteousness as that which saves us.
Exactly. And it kind of connects with the point of forgiveness too a lot. Some of those things you brought up made me think about forgiveness. We look at someone and they say, well, they talk bad about us. Well, we may have talked like that about them or someone else. We need forgiveness on that part. We need to forgive them on their part. Of course, we see several times in the New Testament how Jesus would say in the New Testament, if we don't forgive others, neither will God forgive us. I think that's really kind of reflects some of that a little bit. Any questions or comments on that? You keep moving on here in the text, of course. You come to verse 23 through 25. This is interesting. It says, all this have I proved by wisdom. I said, I'll be wise, but it was far from me. That which is far off and exceeding deep, who can find it out? I applied mine heart to know and to search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things and to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and righteousness. Letter E on page 5 says, while we can become wise, we will not know everything. That's what Solomon is saying here. Solomon is saying, look, I tried to find it out. Again, that's verse 24. That which is far off and exceeding deep, who can find it out? It's talking about wisdom. The context is wisdom. Who can find out to the point where they have all wisdom whatsoever? Can't. That's how deep it goes, you see. And so he's saying, look, you can't achieve that. 26 is kind of interesting. Verse 26 says, and I find more bitter than death the woman. Some people think, well, Paul's being kind of, some people might say sexist here. He don't like women, or not Paul, sorry, Solomon. He's saying, well, Solomon don't like women here. Some people make that argument for some reason. But whose heart it snares and nets, and her hands are as bands. Whoso pleaseth God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. Some people say, women, look at women. Look at Solomon's approach to women. That's not what he's talking about. A lot of people look at this and they kind of look at the context in different translations and even to the original Hebrew. And they look at this and they say, well, this is talking about a woman who's trying to run the household. You see, the woman who's trying to be in charge, take the man's position. You have the man, he, of course, is supposed to, what does it say in Ephesians? He's supposed to, in chapter 5, it talks about how, it says it in Ephesians and I think 1 Corinthians as well, that man is the head of woman as Christ is the head of man. Well, woman's like, this is the woman that's like, well, I'm going to be, over the man. I'm going to exercise authority over him. That's what this is talking about, the dominant woman. There on letter F, the dominant woman it causes more bitterness than death. Death causes a lot of bitterness. When loved ones die, it can very easily make people bitter. But here's the thing. It says the dominant woman is more bitter than that. you see, because she causes a lot of grief to her husband, because it's like, I'm going to run things. I'm over you. I'm in charge of you, you see. That's when things like that happen, you know. Any questions or comments on that?
That's an example where I was raised in Michigan. We went to the Methodist church.
Mhm.
She was the preacher.
Oh,
My
yeah.
husband left her because of that.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
because she really took over.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he was supposed to be a minister. She took over and he went to another church.
Oh, wow.
She was very demanding.
Oh,
I think one thing to remember here with Solomon is the scriptures are clear. You know, if we look at First Kings, it says in chapter 11, verse 3, he had 700 wives,
yeah.
princesses, and 300 concubines. But here's the key to that. And his wives turned his heart away.
Yes, yes.
And so I think what he's getting at here, the New American Standard Words, verse 26, it says, and I discovered more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and
Yeah.
nets. It's a trap.
Yeah,
These idolatrous women pulled him away from serving God to serve their gods.
yeah, yeah.
Right, and he goes on there in verse 4, 1 Kings 11, it says, for when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father.
Yeah,
And so that's what he says here in this verse, right? He goes on in verse 26, he says, whose hands are changed, one who is pleasing to God will escape her, but the sinner will be captured by her.
yeah, yeah. Come to think of it, when you think about all that it says there, you know, then you have the ensnaring here, and you have them ensnaring Solomon there. Again, some people make the argument that Ecclesiastes was something Solomon wrote, maybe perhaps expressing some repentance in it. That could very well be the case here, especially, you know, kind of matching those things up. Any other questions or comments on this text?
Just one
Yes.
other thought, you can contrast Solomon here with Joseph. right?
Yeah, yeah.
Fleeing from those type women,
yeah,
right, or being ensnared or captured.
yeah, yeah. Very good point there. Yeah. Moving on from there then into verse 27 and 28. This is, you know, some more of that, you know, some people say, well, Solomon was just anti-woman. Solomon hated women. Verse 27 says, behold, this have I found, saith the preacher, counting one by one, to find out the account, which yet my soul seeketh, but I find not. One man among 1,000 have I found, but a woman among all those have I not found. To look at here. But, you know, the Truth for Today commentary on Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon, that by Denny Betrello, he says it like this, kind of giving some thoughts on what he means here. He may have been looking for character, since nobility, honor, and character are rare among people. He continues, it may be that he was looking for wisdom. Again, that is the context to some of this here. So some people think that. The final interpretation best fits within the theme of the chapter. In Solomon's search, he discovered that wisdom is nearly impossible to find. He reported that it is rare among men and barely more so among women. That's his thoughts here. And, you know, basically it could just be saying that, look, he tried to find wisdom and he struggled to find it among men, struggled to find it among women. Why? Because he was looking maybe at those wives that were the wrong women. How many wives and concubines did he have? Several hundred altogether. I mean, that ought to tell you something right there. If he's saying that, he's looking in the wrong place. He's looking among those Gentile nations who didn't fear God. Any questions or comments on that? That's what we're seeing. I think that's what we're seeing really here. But there's a couple other commentators here. Paul Earnhardt wrote a really good book entitled Searching for the Meaning of Life, which is his thoughts from the book of Ecclesiastes. And he wrote that this may be just a rhetorical device to stress the waywardness of the human race. Just saying, look, Men, it's hard to find it. Women, it's harder to find wisdom. That's kind of his point. There's a guy named Wilson Adams. He wrote in his workbook, one thing he did learn was that sexual flings are an empty mirage. The fulfillment of Solomon's sexual escapades helped him in only one way, to warn us against making the same mistake. Almost again, kind of going back to the wives thing right there. How many wives and concubines he had? Well, he was trying to find happiness and pleasure in those things, finding happiness and pleasure in having hundreds of wives. And what happens? He couldn't find it. Even more so, because he took them from the Canaanites, some of the Gentiles, I should say, from Gentile nations and Gentiles that didn't fear God. He couldn't even find one that feared God among them. Any questions or comments on that? Yes.
I think this too goes back to if you add up those 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000.
Yeah.
Right. So he had firsthand experience with 1,000 women.
Yeah.
And so his musings here, his teachings here is firsthand that he's got firsthand experience with these 1,000 women, and the ultimate result is that they led him away from God.
Yes.
And so, it's one of those things that this verse can very easily be pulled out of context to promote a lot of stuff that it doesn't promote. But this is something that he's got firsthand experience with, and he's trying to, I think, give some warnings there, especially when you think about it. 1,000 women.
Yeah.
For one man, you can imagine all the different directions that his heart's being pulled away from God.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very good point.
Is it the Mormon church the one that they are allowed to have more than one wife?
They used to do that. The Mormons did. Then there was a split. I think they call themselves the fundamentalists Mormons or fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. They still will practice that, and so I think their current president of the church, as they call him, he's in jail right now. So for doing that, I think he had about 100 wives, if I recall. It was either 100 or 30 or something like that. It's like, yeah, and that's quite a bit right there.
Yeah.
If I recall, the Muslims do practice that too a little bit. I'd have to double check, but I think it was either 3, 4, or 5. One of those 3 numbers that was like the limit of how many they were allowed to have. And then there was different weird laws back 1,000 years ago when they were kind of starting up, where they said, well, you can have temporary marriages, which was another weird thing in and of itself. But just a lot of stuff there on the polygamy issue. Any questions or comments on that? It's interesting that verse 29 is one of the really interesting verses here in Ecclesiastes. It says, "Lo, this have I found, that God hath made man upright, but they have sought out many inventions." It's interesting, some people advocate the doctrine, well, we're all born with sin. We're all born sinners. I was born a sinner. When I was born, I was already in sin, things like that. And you've probably heard that phrase, well, we're born with Adam's sin, or born with his inheriting his sin or sin nature or things like that. Well, this is what Ecclesiastes 7:29 says. He says that's not the case. He says man was created, God hath made man upright. Man is born good, but then he decides to make bad choices. You see, bad decisions. He sought out many inventions. And I think that's what he's talking. I think that's, again, talking, kind of connecting back to with all the wives a little bit. The wives, the nations they were coming from had people that did just that. They're born good, but then they start making bad decisions. Maybe this is reflective of Solomon himself, too. He was born good, but guess what? He starts making bad decisions by marrying 1,000 foreign women who do not love God. Any questions or comments on that? Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. He's going back to the previous verses. It's easy to take some of these one verse at a time. We have to remember they go together.
Yeah.
And he says, see, this is the ESV version. He says, see this alone I found that God made man upright. Singular.
Yeah.
Then he says, but they plural. They have sought out many schemes, some translations say many devices. One of those devices is in verse 26.
Yeah.
And it's multiple marriages.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so man left to his own devices or schemes comes up with things that pull him away from God.
Yeah.
It was never God's intention. And so Solomon knows this firsthand.
Yeah.
As he talks about this. I find that interesting though, that he uses the singular than the plural there in verse 29. So we don't know if the they is mankind as a plural, or is he talking about all the women?
Yeah.
In verse 26.
Yeah.
That he was joined to.
Yeah. It could be everyone, everyone lumped in at once. So yeah, very good point there. Any other questions on that or comments? Again, a lot of things here in Ecclesiastes, and especially here getting into chapter 8, he's getting ready to talk about kings and obedience to kings. Just a lot of things regarding royalty. It says in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, just looking at verses 1 through 9, I know it says verses 1 through 4 at the top, but verses 1 through 9 says, "Who is as the wise man, and who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed. I counsel thee," that just basically means advise. "I counsel thee to keep the king's commandments, and that in regard of the oath of God. Be not hasty to go out of his sight. Stand not in an evil thing, for he doeth whatsoever pleaseth him. Where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say unto him, What doest thou? Whoso keepeth the commandment shall feel no evil thing, and a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. Because to every purpose there is time and judgment. Therefore the misery of man is great upon him. For he knoweth not that which shall be. For who can tell him when it shall be? There is no man that hath power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit. Neither hath he power in the day of death. And there is no discharge in that war. Neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. All this have I seen, and applied my heart unto every work that is done under the sun. There is a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt." It's interesting. This is very, kind of weird stuff to kind of say. It's like, well, what's he even talking about here? I think we can break some of it down, though, a little bit. When we look at verse 1, of course, it says, of course, he says when asking a question, he says, "Who is a wise man, and who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed." When asked a question, a wise man's face will shine instead of having boldness. The word boldness here can be translated stern. Some translations like, Brown, Driver, and Briggs defines the word as strength or might. Think about it like this. I like letter C here on page 7. It says the idea, letter A, number 1, letter C, the idea is that he has a stern face, but it turns more confident, starts to shine when he knows how to answer. Someone asks the question, like, Some people have a face that does that. When someone asks them a question, they don't know how to answer. How do I answer that? Well, his face shines if he knows how to answer. You see, a wise man, he's going to be able to know, I know how to answer that. You see, someone asks a question, yes, you see, as opposed to, yes, you see. That's what he's talking about here. Wisdom helps a man not have a stern face trying to think, okay, how do I answer that? You see. Of course, he says in letter 2a, or there on letter B, he's talking about obeying the king. "I counsel thee to keep the king's commandments." We are told to do the same thing in the New Testament. Someone read for us Romans 13, verses 1 through 7. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7.
Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist them incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. But you have no fear of the one who is in authority. Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval.
Look at all those things here. He's saying you need to fear God. And he's also, the main point, of course, is saying, look, you need to obey the governments because God places the rulers in power. And if you oppose the governments, if you say, well, we're going to rebel, we're not going to obey the government, we're not going to pay taxes, which he talks about a little later, we're not going to pay taxes, we're not going to pay, we're not going to submit to our governing authorities, we're going to rebel, we're going to be like the zealots, who were always, seemed like they were rebelling against the Roman soldiers all the time. We're going to do that, well, then you are resisting the authority of the government. You're not obeying the government, you see.
Go to jail.
Yeah, you'll get thrown in jail. As a matter of fact, if in the Roman Empire, you probably would have been executed. And you might even been executed here in the days of course, the kings here during the time of the writing of Ecclesiastes. But of course, he's saying obey the king here. That's the overall point. Obey the king. Then letter C says honor oaths to God. Now, of course, that's what he says, that in regard to the oath of God. Well, here's the thing. Why would Solomon just suddenly say that after saying obey the king?
Christ was the king.
Well, yeah, that might be a reference to obeying God who's king. That might be a reference to that, yeah. Well, why else might Solomon just kind of throw this in the context of obeying the king? If he's talking about a world, whoever the king is over the nation, in this context, I guess it'd be Solomon. It could be whoever Solomon's descendants are. Why obey the king? Why say obey the king and then right after say honor oaths to God? Or honor, he says, of course, and that in regard of the oath of God.
It's being instituted by God.
Yeah, exactly. We need to understand God puts people in charge. If we're obeying God, we need to obey who he has in charge, you see. And of course, if people say, well, you got to deny Christ or you got to worship Baal or something like that, you'd say, no, I'm serving God. I'm not going to do that. We must obey God rather than men. Acts chapter 5. But of course, again, he's saying you need to obey the king. Someone says, well, you need to, pay 50% of your paycheck in taxes. I'm not doing that. You're going to be getting into trouble. That's rebellion, you see. And then at that point, you're not obeying whoever the ruler is. It's interesting, that phrase, leaving the king, in verse 3, he says, be not hasty to go out of his sight. Some translations just say, be hasty not to leave the king. Go out of his sight. Stand not in an evil thing, for he doeth whatsoever he pleases. In other words, leaving the king or going out of his presence is this idea of disloyalty. Don't be hasty to leave him. Don't be hasty to abandon him, basically. You abandon the king, that's betraying the king at that point, if you're going to do that. And if that's the case, the king will punish those who are disloyal. If you're not going to, be loyal to the leader, then the leader may punish you, is the point. Yes?
And keep in mind, too, at this time that Solomon's writing, history bears out that most people who were subjects to a king took a fidelity oath or a loyalty oath to the king. Scriptures mention that several times, I think with David and Joash and even Solomon. In 1 Chronicles 29, verse 24, it says, all the leaders and the mighty men and also all the sons of King David pledged their allegiance to King Solomon. So it was commonplace for people at that time to pledge allegiance or loyalty to the king. You see that a lot especially when Jesus is here, Herod and some of the others. Your allegiance was supposed to be to Herod, quote unquote, son of God, not to Jesus, the Son of God, right? So that was commonplace. But just a question, food for thought, something to think about. When we think about these scriptures, Romans 13, and what we've read here, how should we view the Revolutionary War?
Yeah.
when we decided to revolt against taxation.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
What does the scripture say about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Or even think about the Confederacy. Brings us to think about a lot of different things. Different times people rebelled against government. So, yeah, brings a lot of thoughts to those things. He continues on then in verse 4. Of course, he shows that the king has authority. Where the word of a king is, there is power. And who may say unto him, what doest thou? Again, if a king is in power, his whole point, the king has authority here. He has authority. He has the authority to do quite a few things. Matter of fact, in some situations, kings did pretty much whatever they wanted to. You may remember David. What did he do when he wanted to commit sin and have a relationship with Uriah the Hittite's wife? When he went and committed adultery with her. Well, he did it. He's king, you see. Some people have that attitude. I'm king. I can do whatever I want. And sadly, sometimes that's the case. In a lot of cases, that was the case. It's interesting. Someone read for us 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 10 through 18. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 10 through 18. This is during the time when basically the Israelites are getting ready to have a king. And it's interesting because there's some words that are being spoken to the Israelites. He's saying, okay, you're going to get a king. You're going to get this king, but here's some things that that's going to happen because you're getting a king. Again, 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 10 through 18.
So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and put them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself leaders of thousands, leaders of fifties, and some to plow his ground, to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be performers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers, to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and give them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, and you have chosen for yourself. The Lord will not enter you in that day.
Look at all that there. The king's going to take your sons and draft them. The king is going to take the best of your crops. The king is going to do all of this to you. You're going to become his slaves. And guess what? There is nothing you can do about it because the king has power. You want a king? You're going to have a king. And he's going to have power that you don't want him to have. And you're going to cry out over it. And you're not going to get an answer from God over this. That's the whole point. And so again, the king has authority. The king has power. That's what all of that is pointing to. He has authority that a lot of people would rather he not have. You see, Saul had that power. David had that power. Solomon, all the kings you read about in the Bible had that kind of power. You see. And so it's interesting though. Here's the question though to all of this. Why even bring this up? Why is Solomon bringing that up here in Ecclesiastes? Why tell people, well, the king has authority? Why is he even bringing that up? The king has power. The king has authority. In the word of his voice. Why even bring that up?
I think he's trying to get people not to act rationally, to remember your place in the hierarchy of things, that it's easy to get self-righteous and to say, the king's wrong, whatever the case may be. Remember who has the authority. And I think he's trying to get us to see the long game, that though you may be right about something, if we act rashly, we act harshly, the king has the authority to end us.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to get people to rationalize things out and quote unquote, play the long game.
Yeah.
And that's what he says there in one of the verses. He says, in verse 5, whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. For there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him.
Yeah.
It goes back to chapter 3. There's a time and place for everything. And if we think that we're going to, in a fit of anger, get one over on the king, it's not happening.
Yeah, exactly. We can look at that in times of just modern day. If we think we can do something like that to any government official, same thing. So yeah, very, very good point. Again, we got to be patient and wait things out. There's horrible rulers. There's horrible governors. There's horrible, there was horrible kings. There's horrible governors, presidents, horrible, just go down every government official we have today, president, governor, senator, congressman, go down the list, wait them out, have patience, things like that. Any questions or comments on that? Well, thank you everyone for your attention tonight. We'll go ahead and stop right there, and we will continue with verse 5. We may just kind of look at verses 1 through 4 next week, just kind of as a little bit of review before setting up things for verse 5. But Lord willing, next week we'll continue with verse 5 of Ecclesiastes chapter 8.